We can resume. I'm wondering who would like to go next. Mr. Johnson?
Sir, rather out of the ordinary this one is that I've just had a conversation with an individual who's making representations with respect to a site and the Greenbelt boundaries, so it's absolutely irrelevant to this case. But that individual, which is a Mr. Peter Vernon, appears to have not been informed that this would have been the appropriate session to make a point. And that conversation was somewhere with the dialogue between the programme officer, the inspectors and the council. And it may be appropriate that I just have a few moments to raise it as a Greenbelt boundary, and I only recognise that because in the conversation that I've just had with him is that he's raised this matter once, and it's to do with the North Minster Business Park boundaries. He's raised it once in the examination, and he was told by the inspectors, in his words, to raise it again in this session, but he appears not to have really caught when the moment would have been. So it would be only a moment of time to raise the point on his behalf, if that was possible, sir.
Well, I'm relaxed about that, Mr. Linus. What do you think?
Sir, I have no objection to that. Obviously, we may need to take some time to work out where in the documents we need to point you to, but if the point can be made briefly here, so see no reason why it shouldn't be heard.
Thank you. That's helpful. Go on then, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, sir. So the two documents are obviously CYC 59F, page A4176. And the other document is the Poppleton Neighbourhood Plan. And you might just need a moment to locate this, and it's CYC 82, and in particular, page 16. So if I just give you a moment to find CYC 82. Certainly, sir. And as I say, CYC 82 and it's page 16. So if you, and the council equally let me know if they've got that page available to them.
I think I'm there. Yeah? Yeah. Carry on then.
Thank you very much, sir. You'll see on page 16 the proposals map for the made neighbourhood plan. And in effect, that neighbourhood plan being made is the tool, the decision-making tool for sites in that location, because as we now respect, it's probably the only tool for making current decisions. And what you'll see on page 16 on the plan, on the southern edge of the plan, you'll see an area marked as Park and Ride, as P&R. And then you'll see a white land inset immediately south of the P&R notation. In effect, land that's not in the green belt. Now, what we've got in this particular case, sir, in this proposal for this local plan, is that the majority of that land you see as white land is to be green belt. Now, it's our understanding, or certainly the individual that's making the case here in paragraph 4110, so if you just go down one page onto page 17, sorry, apologies, page 18, is that the position of the neighbourhood plan accepts that the new local plan will set greenbelt boundaries, but as an interim measure, adopts the green belt from the 2005 local plan, the draft local plan, as an interim position, And therefore, what we've got in the new local plan on CYC 59F, and that's on page 176, A4 176, is a very tightly drawn boundary to the existing northern edge of the Northminster Business Park, and the land in question, the white land in the neighbourhood plan, is in the green belt. The individual's case, therefore, is one of, well, first of all, the site was never recognised in the neighbourhood plans having the qualities of greenbelt, but equally, and this is a legal point for Mr Linus and certainly not for myself, so I'm just making it on behalf of Mr Vernon here, is whether or not you actually need exceptional circumstances to put the land back into the greenbelt on the basis that the neighbourhood plan appears to have adopted it as greenbelt as an interim measure. I only raise the point now, sir, it's not for me to defend that case, is whether or not there is something of an anomaly in the plan-making process, and I think it only applies to this particular part of the plan area.
I do hope so. I can see the point that you raised, and thank you for doing that. I don't know, Mr Linus, whether you can respond.
I'll provide a provisional response, and if I may, if we need to reflect on this, given it's the first we've heard of it. But my understanding is the legal ability for green belt boundaries to be set is through the local plan process, not the neighbourhood plan. And it appears to have been at least recognised, albeit potentially not fully, in the neighbourhood plan that we see in front of us. So I don't think there is any legal issue. Certainly, I do not accept the proposition that this neighbourhood plan has somehow put the site into a situation which the local plan process needs to reverse, such that exceptional circumstances have to be demonstrated. I don't think that's the right analysis because, as we've said before, we're not setting or amending existing greenbelt boundaries that have been properly set through another development plan process. We're setting greenbelt boundaries for the first time through the local plan process. So we don't think that we are doing anything through the local plan which needs to unwind any greenbelt designation that's being carried out through the neighbourhood plan. Answer, sir, if there's anything more that we need to say about that, we will put something into the examination.
I think I'll leave that with you. That does sound, well, it conforms with what my initial reaction was.
Yes, my instinct or our submission is there wouldn't have been any power in the neighbourhood plan process to set the green belt boundaries.
As I say, sir, it's not my case. However, is that the neighbourhood plan is an adopted plan, and in 4.1.10 it does in effect set the boundaries in that particular paragraph as an interim measure. Now, again, this is perhaps a matter for yourselves and the council to consider as to the legalities of this, but we think that this is probably one of those local plans that has accidentally adopted the green belt as an interim position. We've made representations on other neighbourhood plans to prevent it from doing so. But as I say, it's not my case, and I think it's probably one for submissions from the council.
Yes, sir. Just note that 4.1.10 says that whatever the neighbourhood plan purports to do, the preparation of the emerging local plan is used as the mechanism for the detailed identification of the York Green Belt boundaries in accordance with national planning policy. So I think there's a recognition there that it is the local plan process that actually sets the boundaries. So I think that wouldn't change our position, that it wasn't for the neighbourhood plan to set any green belt boundaries, and that exercise is being carried out for the first time in the local plan. So it's not a case that we then now have to demonstrate exceptional circumstances.
Thank you, Mr Johnson, for raising it. It's clearly something that we need to be aware of. Wasn't aware of that previously, so thank you.
You're welcome, sir. And at that point, if you don't mind, I'll be excused from today's session.
Yes, for good behaviour. Thank you.
I'm not sure I'll thank Mr Johnson, but...
Mr. Caithness, we were with you shortly before the break, but carry on.
Thank you, sir. Just before I move on to Roughworth, which is the second site, just a final small point on boundary 4 at Fulford. It's been drawn to my attention by one of the other attendees today that the council has made some proposed changes to some of the boundaries recently, for Greenbelt boundaries, where to make them in line with major roads. So we do think there's an opportunity here, sir, for the council to have another look at boundary 4. It is materially different from the other boundaries 1, 2, 3 and 5 around Fulford, and moving the boundary slightly over towards the road would be consistent with the approach the council appears to be taking with some other changes it's making.
Mr. Linus?
Nothing to add on that site, sir. I know there's another site to be considered.
Yeah, we will certainly go and have a look at that, though. Mr. Keith,
Okay.
Carry on then.
Thank you very much. Right, Roughworth. So this is pages 194 to 208. And I guess the most important first thing to say, sir, is Roughworth is due to be omitted from the Greenbelt. That's the clear proposal that the council's making. It says this densely developed area exhibits a low degree of openness and does not contribute to the openness of the Greenbelt. Roughworth is therefore inset within the Greenbelt. So we act for Mr. Adrian Kelly from West Cottage. It's the first house you come to in the village. It's inside the 30 mile per hour zone. It's inside the village signage. There's a small gap between his site and the village, but he is in the village. His house is in the village, and he therefore thinks, and we agree with him, that it's completely unsound to say that Roughworth should be outside the Greenbelt and then to have somehow one single property that's in the village to be in the Greenbelt. Now, our client, he isn't a major house builder, and he isn't a major institution or a major organisation, and he's not looking for sites to be allocated or to be developed. He's spent the last 20 years banging his head against a brick wall, trying to quite reasonably, undertake fairly modest proposals to his property, singles, rear extensions, a proposal to construct a detached garage within the curtilage, within the compact curtilage of his property. And what he's faced with, sir, every single occasion is enthused development management planners rubbing their hands and saying, this is Greenbelt, go away, you're going to have a terrible impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. So we think that there are much more reasonable approaches to planning, and let's get back to a situation in this particular isolated case where you can have an individual who can seek to enlarge his property without being faced unreasonably with Greenbelt policy. And so the council's assessment, what they're saying is his property is isolated. Well, it isn't. It's in the village, and you'll see from yourself, from your own site visits, that it's in the village. It's closer to the centre of the village than other parts of the village that are to be outside the Greenbelt. So, all in all, there's nothing in terms of Greenbelt policy, in terms of protecting the historic setting of York, in terms of preventing unrestricted sprawl, in terms of protecting the countryside from encroachment. The exclusion of West Cottage from the village and its inclusion in Greenbelt simply serves no Greenbelt purpose, and therefore it's just a ludicrous proposal and is unsound. So we'd ask you to have a look at this. And the reason I'm being a little bit more assertive, sir, is because our client, he's just a chap with a house. He's paying us to come along here to express his point of view. So there we go.
Well, I've got the map up in front of me on page 194.
Yes, sir.
Can you give me an idea where?
Right, so you've got boundary 1, and then it's to the north. And where you've got a little gap, and it's then the house.
Is it below the field that says allotment
Yes,
gardens?
sir, yeah, it's
okay.
to the south and west of that. So I know what the council will say, sir. They'll say, well, there's a gap there, and this will encourage
Infilling, yeah.
our client to develop that gap site. Well, that may happen, it may not, and that's really a development management issue. It's not a greenbelt issue. It won't affect the linear or compact nature of Rough Earth. And that gap site is full of trees anyway, so there's other mechanisms to control inappropriate development. And I think the council just says it's isolated with a high degree of openness, and we'd fundamentally disagree with that point. It's a compact curtilage, it's got a hedge around it, it's developed, it's right next to the village. So if the village is coming out, and he's in the village, then he should come out as well.
I understand the point you make. Mr. Linus, Ms. Healy-Brown?
Thank you. I'd like to go to, as predicted from what was suggested, the council does maintain that there is a gap. As you will be able to see on site, sir, and I think this will be helpful to you, there is between the proposed greenbelt boundary and the northern part of the village, there is then a wooded area before you hit the curtilage of this property and then the property itself. And for those reasons, it is seen to be, from an openness point of view, an open setting and not part of the village from an openness and greenbelt point of view. I can understand from a functional point of view you would consider yourself living in the village, but looking at an openness point of view, it was appropriate boundary that has been put forward.
Sir, the only other point I'd add is that insofar as there's concern about the way that the future development of that property would be treated, obviously there's the test in the MPPF where not every piece of development relating to a building of that nature would be automatically regarded as inappropriate, requiring very special circumstances. There are, as we'll come to in later sessions, carve-outs in the policy which accept some development from the definition of inappropriate development. So it's not a case that the drawing of the boundary here is going to completely preclude development of the client's property. But that's not directly related to the boundary setting exercise in any event.
It's tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mr. Caithness, anything else? We're certainly happy to go and have a look at that.
Yeah,
by all means.
if you could, sir. I mean, as part of our July 21 submission, we did provide a suggested alternative boundary, and we do feel it would be a sound minor change. And I think in terms of development opportunities, we can only take what our client said, that he's had refusals for small-scale development in his curtilage because of greenbelt policies. Whereas if he walks 10, 20 metres down the road, his neighbour's not subject to the same policy. And I don't see that as a sound approach. He doesn't see it as sound, we don't. And we just think the council are being unnecessarily rigid in this case. Thank you.
I understand. Thank you.
Sir, just before Mr. Johnson goes, I know he's just here to represent the point that was made, and again, still subject to me saying that we may add something if we feel it's necessary. I'm just looking at page 19 of the Poppleton Neighbourhood Plan. I've been focusing on the paragraph before previously, but it's page 19. And it's the actual policy on Greenbelt. And Yes, that's yes, CYC 82, sir. Be PDF 19 out of 62. Thank you. And the actual policy just says that the general extent of the York Green Belt is shown on the policies map and within the general extent of the Green Belt. So I think the way we'd look at that is that that policy isn't purporting to set any boundaries such that we place this local plan in the position of setting new ones. It's just confirming the position, which is that there's a general extent of Green Belt. And it almost assumes the fact that there are boundaries which need to be set, we would say, through the local plan process. So it may not be that the neighbourhood plan even purports to set boundaries that would require exceptional circumstances to be demonstrated through this plan, irrespective of any submissions we might want to make about whether the neighbourhood plan was able to do that in the first place.
That's helpful, thanks. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, sir. I'm definitely leaving after this point, but there's a suggestion there then that the policy in itself, NP1, may be an unsound policy on the basis that you wouldn't need to demonstrate very special circumstances to propose a development within the general extent of the green belt, in effect. So I think, I'll come back to my point, I think what this policy does, it does adopt the general extent of the green belt as part of that policy. As I say, this is not my case, but I do think the way in which that is worded, that the general extent of the green belt within the plan area is shown on the policies map, is that it adopts the policies map and therefore adopts the green belt as a result of that. As I say, so this is not necessarily one for me right now, but I've just been asked to raise it, and I'm just going to leave it at that with yourself and the council.
I think that's probably best.
Thank you, sir.
Leave it with us. I mean, clearly, I have to have a think about that. But yeah, one does come across some interesting things in neighbourhood plans occasionally. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. Thank you for raising it. It's certainly useful to draw it to our attention. Go on.
Thank you, sir. So I'm here today on behalf of a second site, and I perhaps missed this first time round, but I'm going to invite you to return to Cotmanthorpe. And this is particularly with reference to boundary 2, site 131, as defined on page A430, otherwise known as ST13. That's right, A430. And it's 131. Yeah, so this is possibly somewhat of a bit of a cop-out, but I do echo the comments of Mr. Johnson and Mr. Natkus. Quite evidently, they touched upon opportunities for addressing future housing need and the need to achieve sustainable patterns of development, and also the absence of any constraints identified to the west of Cotmanthorpe on page A428 on the plan there. They also touched upon the methodology and specifically whether or not the land generally to the west of Cotmanthorpe does warrant inclusion within the green belt, or is it more akin to what one might consider to be open countryside. You probably won't be surprised to learn I'm of the view that it wouldn't warrant inclusion. Again, like a lot of the sites referenced today, this particular parcel of land has previously been allocated for development by the council until it was removed during the preferred sites consultation 2016. And at that time, the document tells us that it was removed owing to issues about access. So notably, no specific mention of any harm to the green belt was made at that point. We set out all this in our written reps, of course, but we highlight a number of concerns with the most recent analysis in Annex 4. So, for example, I challenge the assertion that land beyond boundary 2, specifically this site, would be characterised by an absence of built development. It's a relatively sort of modest parcel of land, bound tightly on two sides by dense urban development and contained on the other two sides as well. I think likewise as well, I'm not of the view that it forms part of the wider landscape setting in which Copmanthorpe is viewed either. I think ultimately, like many of the conversations we've had today, I accept that it'll come down to a matter of judgment, sir, and I note your intentions to go out and visit each of these boundaries and make such a judgment for yourself. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Megson. Mr. Linus?
Thank you, sir. I mean, given the location of this site, I think broadly the same considerations that we outlined before would apply, but I'll ask Ms Healy-Brown to confirm that or otherwise.
Thank you. Yes, that is correct. So this is in 59F and drawing your attention to the assessment of Copmanthorpe that starts A418. Excuse me. And on page 24, it does state that land out with boundaries 2 and 3 is characterised by an absence of built development or urbanising influences, apart from several isolated properties, farmsteads and the railway line, mostly being open fields, which form a strong contrast to the built extent of Copmanthorpe. As we've been pointed out, it is a previous site that was considered for allocation. Was previously ST13, which was, and the allocated sites in this location were discussed in the phase 3 hearings. The other thing to note in terms of the proposed boundary, the boundary in this location follows the boundaries of the properties. There's a clear distinction between the urban area and the open countryside in this location. And page 25 gives details of those boundaries, showing that the boundaries are recognisable and permanent, both in terms of OS maps and on the ground. Thank you.
Mr. Megson, anything else? Again, well, we'll be looking at the sites to the north of it, so we'll take that into. It's clearly a boundary that we'll need to take in when we do our site visits. Is there anyone else? There is one thing I wanted to raise, and there was some coverage in a hearing statement, but I can't remember which one. And it related to the Designer Outlet Centre and the questions that were raised about a science park. And I wondered if you could just enlighten me as to where precisely that is and what the status of the application is, and whether it's if you can point me to where it is in 59F. Sorry, I should have mentioned that to you earlier and give you a chance.
Outlet 329, A4329. And I think the site is part of site 694. We maybe need to confirm this next week, but we understand there is a planning application in for a science park on that, covering at least part of that site, as yet undetermined. Ms Healy-Brown can add further detail.
Yeah, as I understand, the application's in, still pending a decision. I understand from the case officer there's a standing objection from Highways England, in addition to Greenbelt Matters as well. The boundary of the application doesn't strictly follow any one of the ones that are on page 329, but as has been suggested, it is included within Site 694, but isn't as extensive as that.
I just wanted to be clear that within the context of the local plan examination, you're not diverting from the boundary that's set in this document and before us.
That's right. As we say, it's an application that's currently under determination, but in the context of the wider proposals of the council, we're not seeking to change the boundary to accommodate that through the local plan.
So as things stand, that application would need to demonstrate very special circumstances.
Correct.
Okay, as long as I'm clear. Because I read the statement and it seemed to suggest, and it might have been my misreading, that there was the council had a sort of positive view of it, but you've confirmed that to be different.
I think we, given the fact we have to determine it yet, I think the most we can say is that at this stage it is undetermined, but there are issues that obviously have to be addressed as part of that. But for present purposes, you can note we're not seeking to propose a change to the Greenbelt boundary to accommodate that proposal.
That's the important thing for the purpose of this morning, certainly. Good. I'm grateful for that. Is there anything else on this particular matter then that we need to raise?
So there's just one matter, not so much on this morning's issues, but this afternoon's. We know there are a number of people who were registered to attend this morning who are also registered to attend this afternoon, albeit we can't find specific hearing statements that deal with the outer boundaries. And I just wanted to check whether those who were down for this morning and whether they're going to be here this afternoon as well, so we can dig out representations in the absence of a hearing statement. No. I just noticed that Mr.
Yeah, my name's on the list. I'm not quite sure. I'm leaving at lunchtime, so yeah,
good. I didn't want to mention your name specifically, Mr. Nakis, but you were one of the suspects.
And we know Mr. Johnson is
well, he's told us he's off anyway. So
anyone else? I did wonder whether about the practicality of bringing it forward and dealing with it now, but
yes, on balance, we thought of the same thing. So on balance, we thought to avoid any possible procedural issue. It was fun. I think Mr. Keith Ness was down as well for this afternoon. No. Mr. Pilcher looks to have left already. Okay, I think that's everyone. Mr. Perkins, just this afternoon. Or sorry, you're observing. Okay, so. And then we had the other representative was Mr. Key from Savills, but it was down for the retreat.
Came the other day, didn't he?
And the retreat's an inner boundary issue. So we'll see what we need to deal with, but it looks like it could be a relatively short afternoon.
Sorry, Mr. Caithness.
Yeah, it was just picking up on Mr. Johnson's point about neighbourhood plans. We've just been having a look at Roughworth, and there does appear to be a development limit in the neighbourhood plan for Roughworth, which shows our clients' land within that. So it just might be something that the council might want and you might want to have a look at. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yes, we can do that. Obviously, if there's a development limit, it's not necessarily a Greenbelt boundary that's being proposed through the plan, so there may well not be an issue there. But if there's anything we need to address on that, sir, we can do.
Can I leave that with you?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Perfect. In which case, then I think, yes, to avoid anything procedural, we should come back again at 2 o'clock. So, thank you for your help this morning, everyone. I'll close this particular hearing and we'll resume at 2, so we get a very long lunch break. Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone.